UFCW Local 135 is honored to sponsor Voice of San Diego's event today. As the leading labor organization in the cannabis industry and the Union for Essential Frontline Workers during the pandemic, we are proud to represent the workers at unionized dispensaries in the San Diego and Imperial Valley region. We thank you for joining us and hope that you enjoyed tonight's discussion on cannabis equity programs in San Diego County.
Hi, I'm Jackie Bryant, cannabis journalist and host of the newsletter and podcast Cannabis. In partnership with Voice of San Diego, we're going to discuss the social equity programs in San Diego County with our esteemed panel tonight. We'll open it up for Q&A at the end. If you have questions during the discussion, please use the function at the bottom right of the video screen to ask your questions. Now I'm going to introduce the conversation tonight as well as our panelists. We have San Diego County Board of Supervisors Nathan Fletcher, appellate attorney and lead of San Diego Cannabis Stakeholder Group Andrea St. Julian, Violetta Wyrick, who is the Chief Equity and External Affairs Officer of cannabis company Catalyst Cares, which does not have shops open yet in San Diego, but there are several to come, and legacy cannabis operator and current equity recipient and licensed operator, as well as equity activist Marie Montmarquet. Welcome, everybody, and thanks for sharing your time and expertise. Before we start, I just want to give a quick background at where we are in cannabis legalization in San Diego County. Is Nathan logged on yet?
I'm here.
There he is. Hi, thank you. Nice to see you.
Sorry, Jackie. I'm so sorry. I know
you are good. We're totally chilling. This is a weed, channel. We're good. We're good here. So would you mind just giving us kind of a background of the history of cannabis legalization in San Diego County from Prop 64 on, kind of the steps of where it's gone?
Yeah, I mean, I think the most relevant kind of to my involvement was what the Board of Supervisors did in 2017 prior to me getting there, which was the direct opposite of everything else that was happening, not only in the state of California, but by the voters of San Diego County, right? So the voters consistently were moving in a way of safe, regulated, and legal, and the Board of Supervisors went in the opposite way. And they essentially did a de facto ban of any cannabis products, not only recreational or adult use, but also medicinal in the unincorporated areas of San Diego County. Now, you had these 5 existing permit holders, and so they couldn't do a complete public taking of the investment they'd made. So they phased them out. They essentially sunsetted them. They would be removed. I came onto the board. I docketed an action to undo that, to move us in the direction of what I think is good public policy and good common sense. And I couldn't even get a second for my motion to do it. And then the board, of course, turned over in November of 2018. And so we, in short order, brought back essentially the same version of what we had done before. And we're able to get it through on a 4-1 vote, which was encouraging. You go from not able to get a second to passing it on a 4 vote. And our real plan for San Diego County is to truly develop not just an ordinance for the commercial buying and selling, but all of it. We got to take into account cultivation and testing and manufacture and distribution and delivery and all aspects of it. And because we are so late in the cannabis game, I can't undo that. That's just the nature of democracy and who gets elected. But I think that we have an opportunity where we can really do some things. We can learn some lessons. We can try to figure out how we do this right. In particular around social equity, which is incredibly vexing. I mean, a really difficult challenge to address. And everyone warned me, don't even try, just pass it and pay lip service. And I said, no, we want to try. I get it's hard and I get it's going to be difficult, but we want to try. And so now we're moving through the period of adoption. An early decision we had to make was, did we want to do this programmatic EIR? And it takes much longer for a county to do that. But one of the things I heard most from a lot of the social equity folks is there's a number of barriers to people entering into cannabis industry, access to capital and all of the things that kind of hold on, someone's texting me that my wife's going to yell at me because my hair is out of control. But so much of the barrier to entry does revolve around going to get those permits and kind of going through that permit process. And so if we can do a programmatic EIR, then we can essentially get to the point where it's ministerial and it's removing kind of one less barrier to entry and we can try and figure it out. So that's why we're taking a much slower approach. So our regulatory process is not going to be done until probably next year. And we do have to deal with those 5 existing permit holders and allowing them to continue to function and give them a little bit more flexibility. And there are also partners in piloting a lot of the social equity type programs that are going to be developed. They're committed to working through those things with us so we can learn some lessons. And then when the full ordinance is developed with the flushed out social equity pieces in it, then they'll of course be subject to that as well as everyone else who enters the industry in the unincorporated areas. I also, and then I'll stop here, Jackie, and I know we'll probably have a bunch of questions and happy to go into more detail on any of this, but there could be an opportunity. Each jurisdiction absolutely can have whatever policy they want. It's their land use authority and they can do it. But as we go through this, we really want to try to work with jurisdictions to figure out, hey, are there some commonalities or there's some similarities? Is there a way we can get to some sense of regional consistency? And I think that would be something, and again, we're not going to impose on any jurisdiction what they need to have. But, a lot of them were pioneers and went early, and we've learned a lot of things since then. And so there could be some alignment, some regional alignment that potentially comes out of this more in-depth process we're doing that I think would benefit the San Diego region and would benefit, not just the consumer who wants to use it, but benefit what I think can be a really thriving industry here in San Diego County.
Thank you for that. And so as I understand, the board meeting in October, that's going to be the first step to figuring out what to do with those 5 dispensaries in the unincorporated areas, right? And then from there, over the course of the next couple of years, the board will be working to implement full legalization for sales, cultivation, and manufacturing. Is that right? So loose timeline over the next couple of years.
Yeah. So in June, we kind of made some of those longer term decisions, right? We came together as a board and it was like, hey, do we kind of go now or do we do this programmatic EIR and really invest, which again will make it it'll make it longer to put in place. But once it's put in place, it will make it much easier to get a permit to do all of the various components of this. And so it was a little bit, and it's the county doing more of the work. Which is okay. We can do that. We can try and figure that out. So that was decision 1. And then if we were going to take the longer runway, meaning we're unlikely to be issuing any permits until 2022, then what do we do with these 5 folks? Because they can't be sunsetted. So we need to tell them, hey, you can continue to operate. And then there were some kind of modest changes, allow them to, if they have on existing site, the ability to expand a little bit, allow them to do adult use, which is not as significant as it may seem. They can currently do medicinal, and it's very easy to do medicinal. Allowing them to sell edibles, a lot of things out of COVID. I mean, that's just kind of where the industry's going. And so, it's just allowing them to kind of continue to operate because we owe it to the consumers that they have to have places they can go in an environment that is still safe, regulated, and legal while we figure out this broader piece. But I also think that there's a utility and value from a social equity standpoint in this. And that all of them have committed. Many of them are working with social equity groups, and they've all committed to really be the kind of pilot program for the components of social equity. And we don't know what all of the components of that will be. We're looking at Oakland did some things that are really encouraging. I think when I look at Oakland, I see both on a funding side and not just a mentorship, but a mentorship with some actual skin in the game.
Yes.
And I think there's examples like that. And then there's examples like Los Angeles that perhaps, we don't quite want to do what they did because it doesn't really appear to be working. But, these 5 existing permit holders have all committed to be a part of that. And so we are out with an RFP to get a consultant to really help develop what those social equity programs are. And then along the way to final adoption, we can kind of test them out, pilot them with these existing permit holders who are all committed. Many of them, again, are working with groups. When we did it in June, there was no opposition. Everyone seemed fine with the approach, and that was true in June and July. That was true throughout all of August. That was true through all of September. We've had in the last few days some folks kind of have some concerns about the expansion with the 5 permit holders. So we're going to work with folks and talk to them and kind of see what that looks like. But it's just trying to strike that balance of if we want to take longer to make sure we get this right, then we got to balance that out by making sure the existing folks that are there can continue to serve the needs. But again, that's just on one side of it. What we're talking about in the ordinance is so much broader when you're talking about cultivation and manufacturing and testing.
It's huge. It's multiple facets of whenever we say the cannabis industry, you think of it and you just think of weed, but there are so many different parts to it. It really touches everything. So it's a behemoth of a project. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah.
So thank you for that color. Violetta, I'd like to ask you to give a little bit of context about equity programs. What are they? How are they implemented? Where can we see good ones? And how do you work in the space every day? I know I just asked you like 5 questions, but I think you've got this.
Sure. So thank you, Jackie. So one of the big things, obviously, as public policy, and as Supervisor Fletcher mentioned a little bit earlier, there's a lot of shifts in public policy when it comes to what policy in cannabis around enforcement, around what it looks like from a criminalization point of view. Obviously, we cannot separate the conversation around cannabis without talking about the war on drugs and the impact that it's had in Black and Brown communities. So, and Black, Indigenous, and Brown communities. So as public opinion has really shifted, and we really understand the harms that have been, that generational harm that has been caused in our communities, so then the question is, like, how do you shift policy to actually address some of those issues? So, right now, we know the war on drugs has failed. The vastly unequal enforcement provision against low-income and BIPOC communities has been really, really failed, and has been one of the driving forces behind, marijuana reform in California. And as the implementation has been happening in the state within local jurisdictions, we really do have a unique opportunity to be at the forefront of addressing some of those barriers. From the point of entry, obviously, a lot of the conversations that we are having revolve around ownership, which is a really, really important conversation to have. How do we make sure that the actual ownership of this new, retail stores, manufacturing, they actually reflect the communities most impacted by the war on drugs? But beyond that, really thinking about cannabis from like economic development perspective, from a workforce development perspective, because these are jobs for the future. These are the jobs that are going to be, from the retail level, from the entry level, all the way to executives, to management, to marketing, even in the policy world. So that is something that is really important. So one of the primary strategy in repairing those inequities is, how do we make sure that Black, Indigenous, and Brown communities actually have a stake in the industry, and how do we make sure that these conversations are happening? So obviously, we've been kind of like dabbling in California since 1996, with the legalization, and then obviously in 2015, 2016, as Prop 64 has passed. So we and as local governments have moved to regulate, some cities have created a process which attempt to regulate the market, but there's a number of barriers that, as the policies are being written in, they undoubtedly increase those barriers, and we're talking from like high taxes, stringent regulations, a lot of times, even for the programs, and and I can go into more details about like specific programs, but even programs where they do have funding, the state of California did provide some funding for local jurisdictions to be able to increase and to be able to support and assist social equity programs. That funding oftentimes is not being used by social equity applicants because of the barriers that are happening, in how do you, it's not just the funding, it's the know-how, it's how do you move through the CUP process within the county or the city. How do you make sure that you are compliant with everything? So that is it in order to really truly address social equity, it has to take a multifaceted approach. It has to be, it is something that it really we have to create those true public-private partnerships with the industry, with social equity applicants, with local jurisdictions, with the state, and hopefully once the federal government, right now there's a big conversation that's happening at the federal level around banking. The reality is that you cannot. How can you run a business when most of our transactions are happening in cash? For a woman-owned dispensary, I was in a panel a few months ago, and she's feeling every time she goes out of her store and into her credit union to try to make that deposit. You're talking about like physical risk that is happening so that's just, I mean, really big picture. And I don't think, many states have also been, like New Jersey, Illinois are moving to have more of those statewide programs that are a little bit more comprehensive. But, right now, everybody in San Diego is in the perfect, stage of trying to figure out and really do that policy transfer and figure out what are the best practices. Because at the end of the day, I don't think not one jurisdiction, not one city in California has gotten it right, but it's a matter of how do we create the most opportunity for the most folks.
You're on mute, Jackie.
I think I'd be used to this by now. Which California city would you say is doing the best right now? I've roundly heard Oakland. Supervisor Fletcher also said Oakland. Is Oakland the winner here, and why?
I think Oakland has a little bit more of a little bit more of a sophisticated program, and Long Beach is trying to do something similar, where there's like that more of like incubation mentorship that is embedded into how you're able to, like tap into some of those funds. And it's because it's not just about the money, for instance, in the city of Long Beach, we had they have a social equity program, and out of 100 there was 115 applicants into the program. Out of those 115 applicants, 77 actually attended a licensing workshop hosted by the city of Long Beach. Out of those 77 that went through the licensing workshops, only one social equity business has been able to receive the license. And when you meet when you meet her, and when you meet her story, and you really, she would have done it. And so it's almost like, folks that are able to really enter the market and be able to open and be successful, they have been able to do so in spite of the process, not because of it. So now it's one of those things, like, how do you actually create that infrastructure? And again, working with operators that are being intentional. And it is going to take, like Supervisor Fletcher mentioned about those folks, like for industry to have to take a real hard look at ourselves, and to really, be intentional and be a partner, so that we are able to increase those opportunities.
Thank you for that. Andrea, we've talked before, and I talked to you for my story for Voice of San Diego about the need to start off building a local cannabis industry with social equity, rather than, focusing on land use, or which obviously cannabis is an agricultural product. That's an important aspect of it. But what is your thinking behind that?
I think, well, we've talked about Oakland a little bit, and I've, of course, heard about Oakland as well. Last year, so one of the first things I did last year was call Greg Miner up in Oakland, and said, why are people talking about your program? Yeah, and it was he just said some really basic things that are really important that I still think are missing here in San Diego and in other places. Because what everybody has also said is there really aren't any truly successful programs anywhere in the country. I have asked everywhere. There's nothing that's successful. And why is that? The first thing is you have to start out by asking the right questions. You have to ask, who is social equity? Who is a social equity applicant? You have to ask, what is social equity? Okay? What would a socially equitable San Diego look like? Nobody's asked that question, and nobody has the answer to that. And if you don't know where you're going, you're not going to get there. What are the goals of social equity? Okay, if your goal is, first looking at who a social equity applicant is, sometimes we focus too much on the person that's incarcerated, which is very important. But you have to remember that their children, their parents, their significant others were also affected. You take a child out of a parent's life for a year or two, that can be devastating. Should they be considered a social equity applicant too? What about the communities that had large numbers of young men and women in their prime taken away? Did those communities suffer? So you've got to look at, definitely have to look at that. And what is social equity? if your goal, if a socially equitable San Diego is about communities who have been devastated, having some type of economic rejuvenation, handing out a few licenses isn't going to get you to that goal. Okay. So if you don't figure out what your goal is, you're not going to take the right steps to get there. Okay. And again, we're not having those conversations in San Diego, and we have to lead with that. The next thing that Greg Miner talked to me about, he said, do not jump to solutions. And that's probably uh, the second biggest mistake I really see being made. We keep jumping to try to fix something, to try to get something going. And we haven't done the work of, what Greg talked about is look at the relevant issues, look at the data, analyze it, and let that analysis guide you to what your solution should be. Okay. And these things aren't really um, um, particular or peculiar to cannabis. I mean, a lot of people starting a business jump to solutions first without looking at the data, looking at information and letting that guide you. Okay, so it's a common problem. Another thing is acknowledging past problems in social equity. You know, one of the biggest problems comes with, you define social equity and you just start handing out licenses. Before you know it, you have a few people who have some licenses and who almost immediately lose their sell their licenses for little to nothing because they don't really know what to do with it, or they enter into agreements with um, people involved with real estate, with investors. They lose their equity or they lose their profits. They could be the owners, but they've contracted away all their profits, right? Um, we see that over and over again, and unfortunately, it's called a lot of people call it social equity pimping, right? You find a person who qualifies for social equity, you then go in there and you you have investors or someone who may own a cannabis dispensary, and they go in there and think, I want to expand. Let me go find somebody who has a social equity license. Let me smile and tell them I'm going to make everything all right. And they go in there and they take everything and they use them to get what they want. Okay. That could easily happen here in the county. Um, we've got to address the disparities in access to capital and, as I said, real estate. The laws, as they are crafted in most places, give the power to the investors and to people and landlords. Okay. Um, and also there are disparities in education, right? So, how does all this happen? And this is something that the county is being really good and really being intentional about. And I really have to thank Chair Fletcher for this. County planning has been great. Andrew Strong have been great about this. You have to start with social equity. You've got to start. This is how almost every other jurisdiction, I don't know of any other jurisdiction that has done it differently. What they do is they start by enacting a cannabis ordinance. And then they try, as an afterthought, they try to jam in social equity, right? Okay. The biggest problem is social equity can't grow and thrive when you've got a cannabis ordinance that does not allow them to do that. And I think the problem is that a lot of people don't understand the true art of crafting an ordinance or any type of legislation. I have done it. For people who have done it, they understand there is so much to doing that appropriately. And there is such an art to that. And the first thing you have to do to appropriately craft an ordinance is, one, you have to understand what the issues are. You have to understand what your goals are. You have to understand what the community needs and wants. You take that information and then you craft an ordinance around that. If social equity is what we want at the forefront, we have to craft a cannabis ordinance around social equity. We have to craft that ordinance around the needs of cannabis businesses, around cannabis consumers, and around the community as a whole. And if you don't start there, you're toast. You will never get anywhere. And as I said, what the county is doing right is that they have started to by creating a social equity program, and then we'll know what that cannabis ordinance is supposed to look like. That's really the only way you can do it. Now, I do have to say, I do think that the county has kind of gone a little sideways with respect to the proposed ordinance regarding the cannabis operators. Um, the cannabis operators have talked a lot about social equity, but the problem is the proposed ordinance has absolutely nothing about social equity in there, and that's a real problem. You know, um, and I probably shouldn't say this, and it's never a good thing to say, but I do have to say this. I think Chair Fletcher is very sincere in his intentions. I know you should never talk about intentions. It's too dangerous. You can't read anybody's mind. But I honestly believe that Chair Fletcher, County Planning Services, very sincere. Andrew Strong, extremely sincere in wanting to put social equity first. But the problem is that intention is not shown in the county operators ordinance, where there is a 100% absence of social equity. So we've got to we can't let our good intentions keep us from keeping our eye on the ball about what is actually happening. So with that, I could go on and on, but I will stop there.
I think it's a good opportunity to have Supervisor Fletcher maybe talk about what they're doing at the county level.
Yeah, no. Thank you, Jackie, and thank you, Andrea. And I think that so let me just dissect a couple things that were said, and where I'll tell you we're in absolute alignment is the point about figuring out the social equity piece first. So we are not talking about what is in the long-term ordinance for the county, because we don't know what will be in the long-term ordinance for the county, because we have not begun, as she so rightfully points out. And this is something that, look, I learned, and listen, when I started this, I thought, you know what, let's go find the best ordinance that's out there and let's figure out how we tweak it a little bit, and then let's just do that. And then folks are like, no, you're doing that backwards. You got to do the social equity piece first. You got to answer all those questions that were just so eloquently outlined about figure this. Then you can craft an ordinance to meet those aims. And so that is what we're doing. And so I can't tell you how many licenses will be where or how you'll get them, because we don't know, because we've got to do step one, which is this equity piece. We've also empowered our Office of Equity and Racial Justice, which we created a little while back, and we've empowered this piece of that there with Andrew Strong, who was mentioned. We're bringing in a consultant. Again, was a request the community bring someone in, help us develop all of this, and then that will help guide the creation of the ordinance. And so I think in that regard, we are completely 100% in alignment. Where I think there's a fair debate and fair discussion is we've got these 5 existing folks that are doing medicinal right now, and we're not going to go from 5 to 10 or 15 or 50. But those 5 have got to continue to operate, because we're taking so much longer to develop the ordinance, which again, I'm not critical of at all. I think when we get there, it'll be, I mean, I'll be disappointed if it's not a model for how you do this. But those folks have got to continue to operate until we get to that point. Now, they will have to comply with what we do when we get there, and there's no significant expansion. They can expand a little bit on site, but they can't go buy 10 new buildings and do 10 new things. It's not that level of thing. And there is a little bit of, like, yes, they say they will participate in trying out some of these ideas as we develop them before we get to the totality of the ordinance. And we're going to have to hold them accountable to that. And so I respect that the skepticism and concern, I think, is legit and valid. But again, I think the 5 existing operators are a really minor piece compared to the totality of what we're trying to do. And the totality of what we're doing, as Andrea outlined, is identify, work out the social equity component first, and have that guide the development of the ordinance, which is why it's going to take us so much longer to get there. So I think we're generally aligned. And again, it's been an education process for me. And having to listen. Initially, I was like, look, let's go. Let's get this ordinance in place. Let's get the economic development. We can figure out the social equity fast. And folks are like, no, you need to slow down. You need to spend the time on the front end. We need to answer these questions. We need to develop these things, and then let that guide the other piece. And I not only accept that, I embrace that approach. And I think that's what will get us the best outcome.
And as I understand it, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Just one thing. One thing in particular about the proposed ordinance for the county operators is it allows the county operators to sell their businesses to whoever they want without anything having to do with social equity. That is nothing but a payday for them, and a payday that completely excludes social equity. And there is nothing in this proposed ordinance that requires these county operators to, in fact, engage in any type of social equity whatsoever. And especially if they sell their businesses to other organizations, there is nothing that requires them to be a part of social equity. So that's really, and I think, and as Chair Fletcher and I said, we do agree on most of it. We really
Yeah. No. It's not. Criticism is good. I mean, we always need to question and be critical. I think that's a good thing. But I think we've got a little chicken and the egg dilemma here, in that we've got 5 existing permit holders that are currently selling cannabis products in the unincorporated. We don't have a social equity program today because we're taking time to develop it, right? So I cannot impose upon them something that does not yet exist. I also can't stop them from doing their business, because that would be an illegal taking, and that would be wrong for the residents of the unincorporated who need to have access to this. And I think we agree on that. So I think we can work this piece out with the 5 existing permit holders. But I think the ordinance, when I talk about the ordinance, that is the comprehensive ordinance that will guide all aspects of it. And that is what is coming. And I think that is what we are doing, right? And I think we agree we're on the right track. Now we got to see what the outcome is, right? We're a long way from the outcome. But I think we agree we're on the right track for the social equity working group, for the consultant, the Office of Equity and Racial Justice, develop the comprehensive ordinance. That'll be back, next year, a year from now, 2022. Like we will be there. In the interim, we're just figuring out how do we bridge these 5 reasonably small folks that are out there now to continue to meet the need. And I think it's in the total of what we're doing is a relatively small piece. But again, I can't impose on them a social equity program that we haven't even developed. And so that's a little bit of the challenge and dilemma we face. Now, we can work to figure out, how do we hold them accountable to make sure that as we're developing concepts around social equity, we can test them, try them. I know many of them are working with some of our social equity groups on this. And I think there's some good things that can come from that. But again, I understand that the skepticism, but it's a kind of a smaller piece. I think on the broader effort, we agree with where we're going.
Marie, and thank you both for that, and thank you for your candor. And I do want to come back to talking about how you're working with the city, because the city has been legal since Prop 64, but they haven't also had an equity program. I'd like to hear more about that in a minute, but I also would like Marie, Marie is a legacy operator in the cannabis industry. In the cannabis world, we use terms like legacy, traditional, to describe what other people would commonly call the black market, the illicit market, the unlicensed market. It's a way of honoring operators who, before legalization or in the Prop 215 days, or, wherever you were, who were in, working in cannabis and now have a stake in the legal industry. So Marie, if you could just give us a little bit of background where you are, a little bit about your many businesses and your path through the industry, and your firsthand experience with equity programs and equity activism, because we are talking so much in hypotheticals here, and I'd like to get a little bit of, someone who's been through it.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me on the show, Jackie. I'm happy to give you all the insight that I can on something that I live every day. I'm from Nashville, Tennessee. I was arrested for cannabis in Nashville, as well as my business partner in Tennessee. Moved to California. Luckily, got everything expunged, which I'll talk about a little bit when it comes to raising capital, and was able to come to California. I've had compliant cannabis businesses since the end of 2014. Started with delivery, and I was in an area that was more of the red zone. It was not a friendly area. They're still just now looking to regulate in Redwood City, the first retail in that county. So it was a hairy situation for a while there. And we also then established the farm in Salinas in Monterey County, which has no equity programs there. In Redwood City, which is coming online for retail, there'll be no equity programs for these first 6 retail licenses in Redwood City. So I moved my delivery company, which was what we established in 2015, 2016 to San Francisco to remain compliant. And we transitioned then from Prop 215 into Prop 64. So we've had all of our businesses in compliant always in Prop 64, which has been a struggle to transition and just see all of the hurdles and the barriers to entry. We had to sell our soul a little bit to make that first transition. So we've been able to establish distribution. We have a nursery. We process on our farm. We have 50,000 square feet right now of mixed light in Salinas, and we just locked down another 200,000 square feet that we are developing out. So it's interesting, I've been through a lot of the challenges from the war on drugs just personally, but coming out to California, I've just tried to be an activist as much as I can in the equity space. And I have a ton of notes on this topic that I am happy to talk about.
Can you talk a little bit about raising capital and getting capital? Because again, yeah, the mentorship programs are nice, all of that. But if you don't have the money to operate a business, it's pretty hard to operate a business, I'm told. So if you could talk about that and how that plays into, the things that have happened to you over the years and different impediments that you face.
Right. I think a lot of the things that, Andrew and both Nathan have said today are very, very true. Access, right? Access to funding is crucial. If you're in a startup business, I'm in San Francisco right now, raising startup capital is very, very intricate. You're building data rooms, you're building your pitch decks, you're having well-established meetings with people that have investment companies that understand financial tech, that understand how to raise money and can put you in those right places. You're talking about corporate development documents. You're talking about things that I knew nothing about and that most equity operators have no idea. We've funded most of our businesses bootstrapped, whether we were in the legacy realm. My brother and I, up to this point, have only raised money from friends and family. I've had a lot of interesting conversations with different venture capitalists. Sometimes the number's just too low. A lot of the times I just don't look like them and they may not trust that I will repay them, even though we have, I'm sitting in a different position. I don't have a startup. I have a functioning, profitable, operating farm. So sometimes I feel like I should have some piece of leg up, but we're talking about collateral, right? We're talking about coming from impoverished communities, coming from places where you don't have access to land. So what do you have to collateralize? Collateralizing a farm is hard. Who is that valuable to? Only someone that can go in and create an instant asset with that and know how to yield and harvest and distribute that product through the pipeline, right? So when it comes to raising funds, it's an extreme challenge. And then just to note, luckily my brother and I, we have clean backgrounds. We've both been arrested for cannabis. Luckily we threw a lot of money at the problem and problem went away. Most people, to prove that you're equity, what do you need to prove? That you have a charge, right? So normally you're not in an expungement lane. You are coming, whether it's you or your family. When I sit across from very, very rich individuals, and if I said I had a cannabis charge, even if I said I had a reckless driving charge, it really doesn't matter what the charge is. The charge is bad. I can promise you every time they're never going to sit across from an investment group, a venture capitalist firm, angel investors, any groups that are traditional investment structures, and them offer you a smile in a positive manner when you say you have charges. It's just something that's not embraced. So you're sitting here and you have an utter contradiction, right? We want to help the people that have charges, but we have no funding for them. We have no real estate for them. We have nothing but grants. And then the grants that we've had in San Francisco are a joke in a lot of ways, but you might get 40 grand up to 100 grand if you're a sole proprietor. There's only one sole proprietor in San Francisco. That's how hard it is. Reese Benton is the only person that hasn't had to go partner with a very large firm and give away a very large percentage of her equity business to anyone else. She's the only sole proprietor. So where do you go for funding when there is no funding? Even for me with an operating business, like I'm building dad rooms, I'm doing all of these things, and I have a profitable business. It's still very hard to raise funding. And I mean, friendly funding is still something completely out of this world. Me and a partner of mine, we offer 4% loans to equity operators that we work with. No one has ever offered me a 4% loan. That would be an utter joke. Like no bank, even though I have a bank with my farm, our bank funding is astronomical. It's nothing that's friendly. It's nothing that you would want. And it's short term. Even like successes and failures when we talk about Oakland. Oakland has a lot of successes, but they also offered short term loans that a lot of people went out of business trying to pay the city back in a very short term manner. So there's definitely a lot of pieces of the program that work. But when it comes to funding, nothing works when it comes to funding. Even the $100,000 that you can get as a sole proprietor in San Francisco, that's not even going to cover your rent. We're in San Francisco. You're talking about retail. We're being gouged. There's no friendly Amazon can come to San Francisco and we offer every tax break. Every tax break. We could offer them the world. We'd build them a freeway. We might put a bridge up. But when it comes to equity, we don't have any sort of, friendly incentives when it comes to real estate. Our landlords don't have any incentives to work with us. There's no banking incentives to bank with us. And of course, we can't bank in any, traditional manner. So, I mean, as it stands, and then even in San Francisco, our grant program, you had to have the money and spend the money. It was not a grant. It was a reimbursement. So I'm supposed to be impoverished and make under $70,000 a year. I'm supposed to have a charge in cannabis. My family's supposed to have a charge in cannabis. I have to be evicted. I have to live in these police beats that I obviously was over-criminalized. And you want me to build one of the most expensive businesses in the world on 100 grand a year and not have to go out and get a predatory contract with a Stizzy or a company that's going to come in and own my business one day? Doesn't add up.
And so it's really not possible for most people without significant help. And so, I mean, there obviously, Violetta, I see you nodding rather vigorously over there. Does this echo, what you've seen throughout your years organizing and with Catalyst Cares and opening up shop in new locations in Southern California? You're muted.
I was having some technical issues here. Yes, no, I mean, definitely, one of the things that, as I was mentioning a little bit earlier, the Long Beach, dilemma and, to Andrea's point, the city of Long Beach implemented, they give out the licenses in the city of Long Beach. And when they were circling back to try to improve the social equity program after, again, a failed program of, where only one successful social equity applicant was able to move through the whole process and, and she's getting ready to open her doors. But the biggest thing, and that's kind of the reason why we really stepped up in the city of Long Beach and to advocate. And, we actually advocated against, what many would consider our own self-interest, particularly in the city of Long Beach. The industry was, completely adamantly against increasing the number of brick and mortar licenses in the city of Long Beach. Obviously, there could be an argument that there's already a saturation in the city of Long Beach of brick and mortar licenses. So the conversation was centered around only increasing doing additional delivery licenses for social equity applicants only, and also share manufacturing, which when you're limiting really just the number of the licenses that are going to be going to social equity program, then you're like creating this two-tier system of of the current operators who already are able to were able to successfully get those brick and mortar licenses versus social equity applicants that have been so far left behind, particularly in the city of Long Beach. So one of the things that we actually did, we partnered with a social equity applicant that had already already gone through the process in the city of Long Beach, and we gave them we partner and we gave them our social equity, our delivery license. So it's a business within a business out of one of our stores in the city of Long Beach, and set them up with products, set them up with the whole metric system, with the training, because like you mentioned, it's not just the capital, it's not just the grants that are so, you're talking about $40,000 to $100,000, like that's like really nothing. If you're having to secure your property, which many cities, you have to have your property secured and you have to have your lease before you're even able to go through the application process. That money's just gone just in that one little piece of a much larger pie of what you're having to do to create that, to be able to get your business up and running. And even with all of the with a lot of the mentorship, the capital that we were able, like we've been investing with Pusherman, that's the delivery, that's Carlos is the social equity social equity partner in this venture. It's also having the connections, being able to for a delivery, being able to get allocated the right products so that you're able to get, it's the marketing. Marketing is brutal in cannabis. You cannot do the regular type of marketing. You're really limited to social media and and Instagram and Facebook, but then pages get shut down because you're being reported by by competitors, or so there's all of these other things that even with it, it's not, and again, it's not, yes, it's not just it's the capital, it's the mentorship, it's all of this, it's the public private partnerships that then the right circumstances that need to be created so that you are successful. Because and then also it's just we're thinking, okay, fine, great, where they open their doors, they're not successful, but like Marie mentioned, it's once you have opened your doors, the cost of operating your business and sustaining that business as a social equity applicant, for instance, if I'm in this space, I've been very fortunate to be working with Catalyst, but if right now I'm asked, hey, like we have this money, you want to open up your own shop, even I myself not feel comfortable, because there's just so many things that are required to operate successful and a successful business, a successful cannabis business, particularly for Black, Indigenous, and Brown communities. When you're pigeonholed, and there's really so many limitations, and there's so many barriers, not just at the entry level, but at every single step. And when anything it's institutionalized, institutionalized racism, how do we create institutions that actually are able to open up opportunities?
Thank you both for that. So setting the right stage, let's go back to the city. And before we do that, I just want to encourage everybody to submit questions, bottom right of your screen, YouTube. We will be answering them after this segment. But Nathan, how is the county working with the city? Because I know that they are, starting to get started on their equity program as well.
Yeah, we're talking to them, and I think we have a clear path forward for how we want to do this. Office of Equity and Racial Justice driving first, equity study, equity programs, then development of the ordinance. Again, I think it'd be better if we can align, because you would have tremendous consistency. If you get the unincorporated areas in the city of San Diego on the same program, that not only provides great consistency, but from an equity standpoint, it makes it easier, because somebody may straddle two jurisdictions that are overlapping, or they may have an advantage in one place or the other. And I think that would be good. So what I would say is, I think our intention would be that we would want to align, but it's also very hard. Some of the hardest public policy I've ever worked on is when you have multiple jurisdictions trying to get to a point of something with the complexity of what we're trying to do. And the reality is, I don't want to undersell how hard this is. The reason that there's not a perfect example of just do this and it's all okay is because of how incredibly difficult and hard this is. And, you just heard from someone on the front lines of all of the challenges that she faces when she ought not face those same challenges, right? In terms of banking and access to capital and cost of property. And so, we're trying to chip away and get this as best we can to achieve these aims, recognizing that simple reality of African Americans are 3.5 times more likely to be incarcerated for the same cannabis offense as white people, but Black and brown folks only own 10% of the existing business. I mean that crystallizes, and that's what we're trying to address, but it's very hard. So we're going to do our very best to work with the city or with other cities, but we also have to fulfill the commitment and pledge that we've made to really commit to try and do this in what we see as the best way. So hopefully they come together and align, and we can go forward together. And we'll certainly come at it with the collaborative spirit there. But I think our board has been clear about how we want this process to unfold, and we've got to honor that.
And Jackie, if I can just add a couple of things. I certainly want to underscore what Nathan said about the challenges. Challenges exist, but I also want to be clear that the challenges are of our own making. The challenges are the structures that we have in place in terms of ordinances and laws. We have the power to change that. All right. It's not like it's something, and of course there are state laws that of course are overarching, but we do have the power to do this. And what's challenging is just we have to acknowledge that there are laws and ordinances in place that we've got to change, okay? Or that we have to implement and put in place so that they work for social equity. It's not something that's, out of our power.
Thank you both. So we have a few questions here. Hopefully we'll have a few more, so send them. So the first one, and two of them are kind of in the same vein. The county is considering economic development programs, which are much needed. Can cannabis be part of that program? Growth is huge in projections, so yes.
Yeah. No, look, absolutely. I mean, this is a part of the barrier around this issue, which is we just got to start viewing this as a business. It's another sector of our economy, and we may have extra funding on the outset to achieve some of these aims and intentions, but I'll never forget when you talk about like on-site use, the debate where people are like, you mean someone's going to drive somewhere and like use this and then go home? And I'm like, that sounds an awful lot like a bar or a restaurant, which we have that's kind of, and so some of this is just kind of like, and I'm not suggesting the person asking the question is carrying that legacy stigma, but yeah, I mean, if we have economic development programs, this is an economic opportunity. It should absolutely be available to it. And we may have to do unique things that are targeted to help, as we try and launch this right. But yeah, absolutely. And there is a huge, I mean, that's where you see like the Farm Bureau, like coming on board and I mean, this is a unique coalition. We think we live in this world where like everything's either red or blue, and most of the time it is, but not on this one. This one's kind of fun. You get some really interesting coalitions, and you get some different folks. It's a little bit more like 8-track versus iTunes, in mentality, instead of red versus blue. It's old versus new and past versus future. And so I think we're moving there. But yeah, absolutely. Oh, Jackie, you're muted again.
Keep doing that. One of the biggest barriers to entry in San Diego County is going to be real estate. Does the county have any sort of land bank they can pull for social equity applicants? And if not, could that be a consideration going forward?
Yeah, this is a really interesting idea that has been raised, and one that we're going to inject into it. Again, I'm not going to presuppose what the ordinance will be or what components will be, because again, I wouldn't be honoring the commitment we made to Andre to not do that, right? To not develop the ordinance first, develop the guiding principles, and then do it. But I think there's just a recognition that land use cost is a huge barrier. I mean, one of the other barriers is these initial costs around permitting and regulatory and consultants. And so we think a programmatic EIR helps address that, but that doesn't help on the back end. In Los Angeles, we talked to LA, perfect example of requiring people to like have the lease and property before they can even apply, which again kind of puts people in a conundrum of never being able to break through and do that. And I think those are all, again, I'm not prejudging what the ordinance will be, but those are all considerations that we have to take to heart.
And is it fair to say that you may not have known about that if the county had come online a while ago and this had already been in place? It sounds like these are things that are gleaned from other examples, right? So
yeah. I mean,
there's an opportunity to get it right.
I've been very critical of the county for years for like not having moved forward. And I still hold true to that. But the reality is, had they moved forward, then we would have tremendous existing institutional advantages already built in, and it would be exceedingly hard to change that. It would be harder to change that after it had already been done than it would be to try and get it right at the outset. And so that's where I think, in a way, this outdated approach of the last board has set us up for the potential to do things differently. And I think there's a little bit of excitement, like understandable skepticism, because no one's ever quite done it right. But I think there is a little bit of excitement that perhaps maybe we can kind of pull this together in a different way.
I have to
Another
say,
question.
Nathan,
Oh,
there's
yes,
actually
go ahead.
there's actually a lot of excitement about what San Diego is doing. San Diego. I have people from jurisdictions from across the country so excited that San Diego may be the first jurisdiction to get this right.
Yeah, we're doing a panel on it, right?
That pressure too. Like, I
We're
know,
excited.
like we got to do this. We got to try and figure this out.
Another question. The County of San Diego has the highest number of tribal governments. How will the county work to ensure that equity includes tribal governments? I know that that's been an issue not only throughout the state, but throughout the country, and issues of sovereignty.
Yeah, Jackie, and you've written about this and done some of this and really informed the public. And look, we respect their sovereignty, and to the extent they would like to partner with us and work with us, the door is absolutely open, and we look forward to that.
And another point about federal legalization, and this is something I actually think about in terms of equity programs a lot as well. And maybe Marie and Violetta, you also know about this, and I'm sure Nathan and Andrea, you can speak to this a bit. So as I understand it, federal legalization and different federal laws against discrimination could cause some of these programs to become invalid kind of from the inside out. Is that correct? And how can that be handled, while we're still in state legalization?
Well, the way that, first of all, the way that the current federal legislation is being crafted, it would decimate the legal market in the state of California. Just the way that the tax infrastructure is being, the tax structure at the federal level, and then obviously, we have the state, local, and this is something that we've been recently been a lot more vocal. Our CEO Elliot Lewis has been talking a lot about this. The fact that with the way that the industry is being taxed is basically, war on drugs 2.0. We unfortunately, there's, we have you have operators that are really trying to do the right thing, being in the legal market. And, there's a number of factors that are really affecting, the sustainability long term, not just for legal operators, but particularly for social equity operators, just, the tax structure. So from the federal perspective, the way, that bill is being, crafted, it really does, it would decimate the legal industry here in California. The important, and I think one of the things that it's it's really, really important that we try to address as soon as possible would be, it's definitely banking, and it really is trying to figure out how we treat the industry as as a business, legal business that it is becoming. The industry is growing. We are one of the fastest, if not the fastest, job growth in the last year. California has had the largest of that growth, with about 60,000 full-time equivalent jobs in the industry. So from California licensed cannabis sector, every single year is growing about 80%. So we are, but unfortunately, the industry, at the ownership level, is obviously not reflecting our communities. But when you get down to the workforce level, it's reflecting more. When you go and look at our stores, it reflects our community. So there's the decriminalization that needs to happen, and as legalization begins to happen. But with the criminalization, how are we actually making sure that records are being expunged, so that is no longer, we are trying to address that, at least at our stores, like a city by city. LA County just, did some 6,000 expungements, but how are you, this is something that hopefully, as the County of San Diego is, trying to think through, is like, how do you make sure that folks that do have like previous records, those are expunged, so that is no longer something that they're having to deal with. And so from a federal perspective, and hopefully as we're having this conversation, because the way that ultimately policy is being implemented in California, it is so localized. It is city by city. It has been county by county. So how that trickles down as, with the legislation at the federal level is going to have a huge impact. But the most important part is, like, how do we make sure that we're not trying to, create this additional vice tax that, it's already pretty much, decimating the legal market, and it's going to, it's adding a number of barriers for the communities that we're trying to uplift.
And Jackie, just to add to that, I mean, I think you've got the issues of could you have a federal preemption of a lot of very intentional things that were put in place. I think that is one area of great concern. The second area of concern is just that the moment. And again, this is where it's just the complexity. Of course, I think all of us who want safe, regulated, and legal want the federal government to make it safe, regulated, and legal, right? So it's just the reality that depending upon how they do it, you could see the market entirely upended, where we're working to create kind of small businesses for folks that have been disproportionately impacted from an equity standpoint, having ownership and having operating capital and developing all of that. And if the federal government just throws the doors open with no guide rails, it could upend the entire market, and you could have a few massive entities that would just swallow and consume everything across the board whole. I mean, you would have—
It's already happening to some extent, and we don't even have federal legalization.
Oh yeah, exactly. But imagine how much worse. I mean, the like Amazon, Walmart just plowing through everything that exists, and you could see cultivation all flocking to the lowest wage. You talk about a race to the bottom on wages and worker conditions and all of these other types of things that you see. And so I just think it's important, if as the federal government's going to move through and do this, that the same advocacy that has brought our county to do this differently, that same advocacy has got to push the federal government to make sure that they are mindful of the implications. Again, not to say don't do it. Of course, the federal government should legalize it. I mean, this is one of the greatest, hardest things to explain. Well, it's against federal law, but we say it's okay, so you can do it. But it's really hard to get a bank account. You got to run around with a bunch of cash. I mean, it's just a little silly. And so certainly we want them to do it. I just think there could be some really significant unintended consequences. And again, the federal government is later to the game than even the county of San Diego. And so, they may not be as in tune with a lot of this. And so I just think it's important that there's a lot of very focused advocacy, to make sure these things are addressed as they go through their process.
Yeah, that's a really good point, because especially with all the news swirling around, for those who are not aware, the safe banking, which allows, certain banking provisions, is coursing through, about to go into the Senate, just passed the House, and it's attached to a big defense bill that almost surely will pass. But a lot of advocates and a lot of activists in the cannabis space are pretty annoyed that that's going to happen before legalization, because even though it's the cart before the horse thing, you want to give safe banking to give proper avenues for these equity businesses or businesses period to survive, but then also you still have people in jail if you don't legalize it. And so it's this horrible circle where which is first, which is best, and there's a lot of argument in the cannabis world about that right now. So thank you for making that point. We have another question. And I don't know if you're going to like this one, Nathan, but when can we see a first draft of the regs and comment at them? On them.
Good question. I mean, not until we get this first piece done, because we're not going to be drafting an ordinance until we have done this front end work. So, we're looking at all of 21, just continuing to work through these equity issues and begin to develop that. And this will be very transparent, a lot of stakeholder engagement, a lot of sharing of drafts, a lot of updates to the board as we go through. And it would be my hope that in 22 we would be, a year or so, we would be adopting the kind of final version of what this looks like. And so there is no secret draft. Here's what we're going to do. We're not doing that. We're doing this, and then we're doing that. And so we've got to hold true to that. But the minute, the first part will again also be very open and transparent with a lot of engagement, and I encourage folks to participate in that. and then we'll get to the ordinance development.
And has the county considered an angel investor tax credit of sorts?
Yeah, again, y'all are having us jump to step 2. You know, we got to do step 1 first. I think these are all good ideas and suggestions that I think there will be a relevant and right moment to have those conversations about the specifics of what's in the ordinance. We are not there yet because we have not done step 1, or we're doing step 1. We haven't. It's getting moving.
I think that those are all the questions that I have and that our viewers have, unless anybody has anything last minute. Is there anything anybody would like to say? Marie, do you have any advice to offer, or any? I know that you're not making the policy yourself, but you live through it and you know better than anyone. So I don't know, any anecdotes that you think could be helpful for us down here in Southern California?
Yeah, I mean, I'm working with a group. Actually, I'll send you guys our document. It's definitely kind of talking about the goals and defining the who, the what, the when, how do we get from here to there. But at the end of the day, like, there's banking structures that give back 10% to those that are affected and could not bank. There's real estate credits. There's real estate discounts that we can offer and that we can create. So we don't have to reinvent the wheel. But what we don't need to do is recreate this same structure of, like, kind of right now, I call it in San Francisco, they give you a golden ticket, but when you get to the front, you need a silver dollar. You know, there's no structure that exists in America today that a business would allow the operator to have majority ownership based on sweat equity. So we cannot continue to engineer just like a structure prime for corruption, essentially is what it is, to have to go and find corporations to partner with that are eventually going to nudge you out of your own business. So just making sure that it's actually funded in a way where people can autonomously operate without having to go sell their soul, sell their business. In San Francisco, initially, they said you can't sell your business for 10 years. They just chopped it down to 5. Even that was a good attempt at something that's not normal. That's like, no one should have to be tied to a structure. If they can sell that and make money and move forth, then that's what America is based on, right? But at the same time, the intent was there: generational wealth, generational ownership. So like Nathan said, if it was easy, you know, I think one of these cities would have already got it right. Like, one thing that we can tell is it is not easy. One thing we don't have is any accountability. We can write anything in these regulations. Shelf space, 15% equity. Where? Who said that? How? Incubating who? Where? Failure. Incubating your friends so you can get 3 more licenses is not incubating equity. There's a lot of things that have happened that have been a complete failure, but I would hope that at the end of the day, we can get some unbiased sources of financing to equity individuals, no matter how you slice the pie and what equity looks like in your city. Just making sure that it's like Andrea said. Right now, I mean, just think about it. How much weed is being sold in San Diego every day? A lot.
A lot.
Nathan, it's your
I can personally attest to that.
You know, it's your job to bring those people into the compliant market. Every day that $1 million is sold underneath your nose that you don't get one little tax on, it will help you tremendously to operate in a realm that brings people like me that have a specialty into creating a business in the compliant manner. Right now, it doesn't make sense economically. If I go to somebody right now and say, hey, come over here, they're going to say never. But it's our job to bring those people in, because that's in all sense of an equitable place, is to create what's happening now in this space. And it's not necessarily to give the licenses to all the guys that made fun of people like me for smoking weed in high school, you know, which is where they're going at today's rate. So let's actually look at, you know, not only who's been criminalized, yes, of course, but who's been criminalized, who's existing in the marketplace today in a non-compliant traditional manner, and bring those people in an equitable manner and help people find funding. At the end of the day, the whole industry went from making money to raising money. If you cannot raise money today in cannabis, you are out of business. You will not exist. You cannot make money. No one's making money. So if it takes 3 to 5 years for a small business to make money outside of cannabis without 280E, I'm not a fan of the safe banking bill. I think that is BS. We need to decriminalize cannabis before we allow rich people to continue to bank. Everyone that wants a bank account cannabis right now that can pay $2,000, $3,000 a month has one. It's not a big deal. We need to focus on making funding for equity programs, like Nathan says, first. We need this done first before we're already 3.5 years behind in reality. Mr. Wrigley and the gum is already making more money than the gum company ever made him. And before we have equity in California, that's just utter blasphemy, right? So just figuring out a way to fund it. Let's fund equity. $831 million went to California last year. Let's fund equity.
I think that's a really good note to end on. We don't have any more questions. And so I thank each of you so much, and especially Supervisor Fletcher. I understand that, things are still super early days. And so I appreciate your candor and willing to go back and forth on these and talk about some finer points that don't even exist yet. And hopefully, some of this was informative for that process too. So thank you, each of you, so much for your unique perspectives and your time and for sharing, some really personal things. It's, this isn't really a normal discussion. So it's appreciated.
Thank you, Jackie. Thank you all.
Right.
Thanks,
everyone.
Thank you, Jackie.